I always thought the quietest sound in the world was someone choosing not to speak your name. The pie I'd baked was still warm when I stepped onto their porch. I'd wrapped it in a cloth that used to be part of an old curtain, hemmed it myself years ago when the girls were little, and everything that touched them had to be soft. I wore a dress that hadn't left my closet in a decade. The sleeves were a little loose, the silk thinning at the shoulders, but it still held its shape. Like me, I suppose worn but standing. I rang the bell, once. Melanie opened the door halfway. She didn't move to let me in. "Oh, Diane, this is just a small family thing," she said, smile tight as a drawstring. "We didn't think you'd actually show up." There was a pause before her eyes dropped to the pie. I didn't say anything. She didn't take it. From somewhere inside, Brandon's voice traveled through the hall like an echo that didn't belong to anyone anymore. "Mom, we meant to call you. It's more for our side of the family today." I stood there a moment longer, long enough to hear clinking glasses and someone say, "Cheers to the next chapter." The door closed before I could hand the pie to anyone. I didn't step off the porch. I backed down one foot behind the other, careful not to trip on the uneven stone. A ribbon from the cloth slipped out and dragged across the last step. I tucked it back in. The car ride home was short. No traffic, no sound. Back in the apartment, I set the pie on the counter, still wrapped. I didn't unwrap it. I didn't throw it away either. Instead, I sorted the mail. A letter from the water company, one from a dental office I hadn't been to in 3 years, and then the one with the blue bank logo on the envelope. I knew the font. I recognized the weight of it even before I opened it. Some mail arrives already carrying bad news, even if it's folded neatly. I unfolded the document. It was a confirmation of transfer. Durable power of attorney, irrevocable designation, effective immediately. Brandon Whitaker, my son. I read my own name printed in neat, non-negotiable ink just above a signature that looked exactly like mine. I don't remember signing it. There was a time when he used to bring me things to sign, school forms, permission slips, things with triplicate copies and carbon paper. He'd watch me carefully make sure I dotted my IS like he did. We used to laugh about how similar our handwriting was. Later that night, I took off the dress and laid it over the back of the armchair. A pale thread had unraveled near the hip seam. I thought about fixing it, but didn't reach for the needle. I opened the laptop. My hands hesitated over the keys, the way you hesitate before turning on a light. You're not sure you want to see under. I checked the family photo album Melanie had posted. She captioned it, "Just us, just love." I counted 11 faces. Emma and Grace were smiling in the middle, holding a gift. The scarf I'd mailed the week before, blue with stitched corners. I watched Grace hold it up to her cheek. Melanie's voice was in the caption bubble. "From Grandma, Marilyn." That's her mother. A day later, Brandon called. I answered on the second ring. "I know that probably came as a surprise," he said. "It's not about trust. We're just trying to streamline things. You've said you wanted us to help more." The words were slow, rehearsed. He left a space for me to agree with him. I didn't fill it. He continued, "Look, it's just easier this way. We'll make sure everything's taken care of." That word everything had too many meanings. "I'm not trying to exclude you," he added. "It's just that sometimes, Mom, you complicate things." I heard myself breathing. "I'm sure you understand." He waited. I hung up. That night I opened the drawer next to my bed. Inside was a box lacquered wood with a velvet lining. It used to hold letters. Now it held the ring I hadn't worn since Robert died. The imprint was still there on my finger, faint, like memory. I pressed it to the ring's curve, but didn't put it on. In the hallway, the light buzzed. I hadn't changed that bulb in years. There were cobwebs in the corners, small signs of stillness, but everything else was exactly where I left it. My life intact on the surface, rearranged beneath. I sat at the kitchen table. The pie was still wrapped. I unwrapped the cloth just enough to see if it had cracked. It hadn't. The crust was golden and unbroken, perfectly intact, untouched. I rewrapped it. Then I looked at the bank letter again. There was a line at the bottom, small print, signed in presence of witness, notarized electronically on file. I tried to recall the moment. The desk, the screen, the signature. There was nothing, not even a flash. I didn't speak to anyone the rest of the night. I poured a cup of tea and watched the steam curl against the air. Some betrayals don't raise their voices. They just sign your name when you aren't looking. And sometimes you don't need to say anything in return. I just placed the cup on the table and let it go cold. Some things don't feel like surrender until much later. I once offered to take Melanie to the spa. It was a birthday weekend, the kind of day where I thought two women could sit in robes, sip mint water, and pretend we liked each other without having to say so. I booked the appointments paid in advance. She looked at the brochure in the car and tilted it away like it had a smell. "I prefer places for people under 60, she said. Not cruel, not loud, just a surgical strike across the windshield. I nodded once and drove us there anyway. She scrolled through her phone while I filled out our intake forms. She left halfway through the pedicure, told the receptionist she had a headache. I finished my session alone and didn't mention it to Brandon. That was the pattern, I think. Not the big arguments, but the small withdrawals, tiny resignations, like carrying dishes to the sink that no one asked you to touch. When they bought the new couch, Melanie texted a photo of it in the living room. "Velvet, deep navy, low back," I replied with a thumbs up. The next week, I rented a small truck and had the old sectional taken away, the one Robert had picked with the wide arms, the soft brown one we bought on clearance after a flood damaged the showroom. I told the man helping me that it was just furniture. He nodded and wrapped it in plastic. I dropped off the keys that night and stayed for dinner. Melanie walked past the now empty corner and ran her fingers along the new fabric. "Well," she said, adjusting a cushion, "finally, this place doesn't smell like old people." Brandon didn't look up from his phone. Emma and Grace were upstairs. I wiped my hands on a napkin and reached for the water pitcher. It was glass rim chipped slightly at the spout, the kind you keep, even though it leaks just a little when poured too fast. They never mentioned the sofa again. I remember the night my chest felt heavy. Not dramatic, not alarming. Just strange, like a warm weight across my ribs that didn't shift when I lay down. I called Brandon around 10. He picked up on the second ring, told me not to panic, said he'd come by. He arrived alone. Melanie had a meeting in the morning. I sat on the edge of the bed. He opened my medicine cabinet without asking, shuffled a few bottles around. "You're overthinking," he said, handing me a small pill wrapped in tissue. "It's just a relaxant, Mom." "You're anxious." I took it. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't know how not to. The next thing I remember is sunlight through the window and the hum of traffic. My mouth dry, my head full of cotton. A whole day had gone by. I checked the clock twice to be sure. My phone had 4 missed calls, all from a number I didn't know. 1 voicemail, an automated message from the bank. I deleted it without listening through. 3 days later, a letter arrived. Plain envelope. My name printed in full. Inside was the confirmation. Legal authorization granted. Durable, complete. Signature in black ink, firm and familiar. My signature. I looked at the date on the line. I don't remember the pen in my hand. In the back pocket of my purse was a folded sheet of paper. Brandon had slipped it in without telling me. I opened it that afternoon sitting by the window with a teacup gone cold in my hand. The prescription label read, lorazepam, 2 mg, for acute episodes. Use with caution. It wasn't something you handed to someone just because they'd called at night. The refill line was blank. Just a one-time dose, one tiny decision, one quiet erasure. When Melanie changed the rug in their hallway, she left the old one rolled against the wall. I offered to take it. She looked at it, then at me. "I think the girls might be allergic to whatever's in that," she said. It was the same rug the twins had learned to crawl across. At Thanksgiving last year, I brought sweet potatoes in a dish Robert's mother had passed down. The edges were cracked but sealed. I'd used it every year since 1987. Melanie placed it on the side table instead of the main spread. "I thought we could keep the food aesthetic consistent," she whispered, like the word aesthetic carried more weight than the food itself. Brandon didn't intervene. He asked if I'd mind sitting at the kids' table. "We're short a few chairs," he said. I stood behind a folding chair while others took their seats. When I looked down at the plate, someone had written Grandma Diane on a sticky note. The only one without a place card. The doctor's office Brandon once insisted I visit had my name flagged as non-compliant. Apparently, I'd missed 3 appointments I never scheduled. When I mentioned it at the pharmacy, the tech asked if I had anyone managing my care. I told her no. She didn't look convinced. I ironed Brandon's shirts for years. Melanie switched him to dry cleaning once she found a same-day service near their gym. I offered to help organize his tax files one April. He handed me a folder with sticky notes marking sections. "Just don't mess with the donation stuff," he said. "We've already included some things under your name." I nodded. I didn't ask what. "I tried to read a book last night. Something old, soft-spined, the corners of the pages curled like the edge of a forgotten curtain. But my eyes kept drifting back to the drawer where I'd put the letter. I read it again more slowly. The signature was smooth without hesitation. No scratch-throughs. No overcorrections. Perfect. Sometimes I think the worst kind of forgetting isn't when you lose memories. It's when people around you start rewriting them while you're still standing there holding the original. I placed the prescription paper back into my purse, folded it once, then twice. I didn't throw it away. I didn't say anything. There's a difference between being in the frame and being part of the picture. At Emma's graduation, I stood in the 3rd row 2 steps to the left of the flagpole. Brandon had waved me forward once, but I didn't move. I knew better than to force my way into symmetry. Melanie adjusted Grace's hair with both hands, and someone clicked a photo. In the printed version, I appeared just behind the edge of the post, half a face, 1 earring, visible no name in the caption. When I laughed about it, Melanie didn't look up from her phone. "It's not about you, Diane." I didn't respond. I folded the program and tucked it into my coat pocket like something that might matter later. They went to lunch without me. Brandon said there were only 4 seats in the car. Grace had a friend with her. I took the bus home. The driver called me ma'am, and I said thank you, like it was still a word I knew what to do with. A few months before that, I had turned 65. Not a number that asks for much, just one that notices who still remembers. Brandon didn't call until nearly midnight. His voice sounded distant, and I could hear ocean wind cutting in between his words. "We're on a surprise trip. Melanie thought it'd be fun to take the girls out of town, just something spontaneous." He paused. "We'll celebrate when we get back." The next morning, Melanie posted a photo. All 4 of them were on the beach, holding ice cream cones, sand on their feet. The caption read, "Family first. Always." The word always felt like a test I hadn't passed. Brandon once left a folder on my kitchen table, a yellow one with Post-its stuck along the edges. He said he'd pick it up later. Inside was a printout. I read the first few lines before I meant to. "Consultation adult guardianship process, elder incapacity clause, and durable transfer of authority." There was a receipt attached. Consultation paid in full. Retainer accepted. I refolded it and slid it back into the folder. I didn't mention it when he returned to collect it that night. He kissed me on the cheek and said, "Thanks for keeping it safe." I nodded. He didn't look inside. The email appeared by accident. Brandon had synced his phone to my printer once, something about convenience, when he worked remotely from the apartment during renovations. I pressed print on a recipe, and the machine spat out 2 sheets. The first was mine. The second wasn't. The header read, Melanie Whitaker, J. Crosswell-esque. There was no greeting, no farewell. Just this. "We need the signature. She's weak right now. Let's push it." I folded it without creasing. I didn't save it, didn't photocopy it, didn't even tear it in half. I just stared at my own name on a sheet I was never meant to see. The cardigan in my closet still has Grace's fingerprints on the hem from the last time she spilled juice and tried to wipe it away without me seeing. I haven't washed it. The stain is faint now, the color faded near the edge. But I know where it is. I could find it in the dark. Last Thanksgiving, Melanie used disposable place settings, silver-patterned paper plates, gold-trimmed cups, printed napkins with phrases like, "Grateful hearts, gather here." When I brought my ceramic serving bowl, she set it aside. Said they were keeping things light this year. She turned to Brandon and murmured, "No need for her museum pieces." I pretended not to hear. I wiped the rim of the bowl and wrapped it back in the same cloth I'd used for years. No one asked where I went when I left early. I started noticing where my name didn't appear. On invitations, it was Brandon and family. On school forms, I was never listed under emergency contact. Melanie's sister had that spot. On the bookshelf, the only framed picture of me was one taken during a holiday dinner. I was in the background, reaching across the table, half of my face blocked by a vase. The frame was silver, but cheap, the kind with the backing that curls when exposed to heat. I flipped it over once. The label still said sample photo. Insert your own. They never did. There's a wooden box in the hallway closet. I keep it tucked between spare linens and a broken flashlight. Inside are cards from Emma and Grace. Crayon drawings, stickers, misspelled notes that once lived on my refrigerator door. I opened it last week. Most of the cards are still there, smudged hearts macaroni glued into the shape of the letter G, a sun, with grandma written inside in shaky pencil. At the top was a new one, store-bought, glossy, a gold foil banner across the front. "Thank you for always being there." Inside a message in pink ink, "To Grandma Marilyn, the best." Marilyn, Melanie's mother. There was no signature from Emma or Grace, just a printed note. "We love you so much." No one had addressed it to me. No one had corrected it either. I placed it back in the box. I didn't rearrange the others. I closed the lid gently. People say forgetting hurts, but I think misremembering leaves a deeper mark. Being rewritten in someone else's version of the truth. Being replaced in places you once built with your hands. I looked at the cardigan again. I didn't move it. I didn't wash the sleeve. Some things don't need to be made new. They just need to be remembered for what they were. I've always believed there's a difference between being helped and being handled. The kettle whistled once before I turned the heat off. I had pulled out the ceramic teapot cracked near the base, but still good, and laid out the small linen napkin with the embroidered corner, the one I only used when someone came by. Brandon arrived with Melanie. No text before no call. She smiled without showing teeth. "Just a quick check-in. You've seemed off lately." Brandon didn't sit. His hand stayed on the strap of his bag like he meant to leave soon. I didn't ask what he meant. I placed the tea tray down. 2 cups, 3 chairs. No one moved to pour. Brandon rubbed the side of his neck. Mom, we talked to someone. A clinic? Just to make sure everything's all right. They can run a few light tests, nothing invasive. I touched the rim of my cup. It had a faint lipstick print. Not mine, likely Melanie's. She always used that coral shade that turned too orange in sunlight. Melanie adjusted her sleeves. It's not like a hospital, more like a wellness retreat. The clinic smelled like lemon and vinyl, not sterile manufactured calm. I was led into a pale room with soft chairs and glass tables. The magazines were from last year, untouched. A man in a white coat entered, introducing himself as Dr. Beckett. He didn't shake my hand. He glanced at a form. Just a few standard questions. Nothing to worry about. He spoke in a tone that was too careful, as if each word had to be slowly spoon-fed. "What's today's date?" I answered. He nodded, wrote something down. "Have you ever misplaced items and blamed others?" I looked at him. "Do you sometimes hear things that aren't there?" The pen scratched again. He smiled like someone who had already decided something. They offered me water. It tasted metallic. A nurse entered and tapped my arm. "Just something to help you relax." Before I could speak, the needle was already in. Warmth climbed into my shoulder. Then the edge of the ceiling blurred as if the room had taken one step back from me. I don't remember falling asleep. I remember the taste of mint and something chemical on the back of my tongue. When I opened my eyes, it was dark. The ceiling had changed. No lamp, no books, no calendar, just a single light recessed above, flickering slightly, like old motel rooms. My shoes were gone. The bed had side rails. The sheets were too stiff. I tried to sit up. My muscles answered late, as if someone else had borrowed them first. There was a clipboard attached to the bed frame. Patient Whitaker. Diane diagnosis. Early onset psychosis. Observed cognitive decline. Note: subject exhibits confusion, memory gaps, disordered perception. Monitoring required. I blinked hard. My name was written in capital letters, but the rest of me didn't belong to it. Footsteps outside. A door opened. A young woman in white stepped in. Her badge read Selena, Care Coordinator. She checked something on the wall. "You're okay. You've been resting." I didn't speak. She looked down, then said lightly, "Your son signed the forms. It's not permanent, just until things stabilize." There was a square window in the door, not large enough to see much, just a rectangle of hallway painted soft beige. It was quiet, not the peace of home, but the stillness of waiting rooms. Someone brought food. I didn't eat. My purse was missing. My phone. My ring. I rubbed the space where it used to be, the indentation faint but familiar. The cup of water sat untouched. My mouth was dry, but my throat didn't ask. I pressed my feet to the floor. The nurse had said until things stabilize. Stabilize what? I was allowed a brief, supervised phone call the next morning. Brandon answered after 3 rings. He didn't say hello. "You're in the right place. It's for the best." I didn't respond. He exhaled, sharp and quiet. "You weren't safe, Mom." We talked about this. I heard Melanie in the background, a soft clink of cutlery, the clatter of home. Brandon lowered his voice. "Don't make this harder." The call ended without a goodbye. Later that day, I was allowed to sit in a small room with a computer monitor. Selena helped me log in an old email account I barely used. One tab had been left open, a real estate listing. Charming 2-bedroom condo with vintage charm, hardwood floors, and natural lighting. Available for immediate sale. The photos rotated automatically. My kitchen, my bookshelf, my bedroom, the floral bedsheet with the faint blue embroidery still on. The tag on the pillowcase was sticking out. I had meant to tuck it back in after laundry day. The photo had captured it. The listing was under a new agent, one I didn't recognize. The price was listed slightly below market value, meant for a quick sell. There were 15 images. Not one had me in it. Melanie had once told a neighbor I was a little unwell, but harmless. Brandon had once laughed when I asked about a holiday plan and said, "It's better for you not to stress over these things." I had agreed. I had smiled. The tea set was probably boxed already, maybe donated, maybe sold. The box of Emma's cards, the wedding photograph with the smudge on my cheek, the chipped porcelain bird from our trip to Sedona. All there, all documented, all for someone else to view as decor. They had told me the clinic was a checkup. I wore my lavender sweater that day, the one I always saved for birthdays. Melanie glanced at it and said, "We'll get you something updated soon." I nodded, my hands folded in my lap. The sweater had one pulled thread near the elbow. I hadn't snipped it off. I had meant to. I touched the window pane with the back of my fingers. There was nothing outside I recognized. The sky was still blue, but it didn't belong to me anymore. People notice noise. They rarely notice what leaves without it. I had gone silent long before the sedation wore off. 3 days of drifting in and out had taught me which meals to skip, which corners of the hallway didn't have cameras, and which nurses had eyes that softened when they weren't watched. The one named Jessie always wore her lanyard too tight, like it irritated her. She hummed when she checked vitals, usually something off-key from the radio, and she never locked the med cart all the way. Once, while refilling the hand soap, she muttered under her breath, "Weird. Your chart's full of cut and paste phrases. Looks fake, honestly." She didn't think I heard. I held onto that sentence like it was a string dangling from the ceiling. There was a shared patient phone in the corner of the lounge. It was dusty. No one used it except to call rides that never came. Jessie forgot her clipboard that morning. I noted the time, 9:42. The head nurse was in the medication room. I picked up the phone without hesitation. No shaking, no second glance. I remembered the number because I had written it once years ago in the back of an old address book. Margaret Ellison, estate attorney. I had met her during a seminar on spousal trusts. She wore turquoise earrings and didn't blink too much. 2 rings. I said quietly, evenly, "They forged my mental report. I never consented. Please get me out." Then I hung up. That was all I needed to say. I returned to my room before rounds. They never noticed. At dinner, they served carrots that still had ice crystals. Melanie came on the 5th day. She walked in like she was checking a hotel room, polished, rushed, distracted. Her blouse was the kind with shoulder pads tucked under soft fabric. She carried my old purse. "I brought you your things. Thought you'd want your scarf." The beige one. I didn't reach for it. She leaned down, touched the bed's plastic railing. "The condo's closing this Friday. You won't have to worry about anything after that. Brandon's handling the transfer." She smiled as if we were talking about redecorating. "After this, you'll be comfortable forever." Nothing left to sign. I watched her tuck my checkbook into the bag like it was a used napkin. She waited for me to speak. I didn't. I smiled instead. That smile was a small, controlled thing. Not gratitude, not agreement, just confirmation. Like placing a final stitch into a seam. That night, I heard the door unlatch gently. Not the usual routine knock. Just a hush of movement and a rustle of fabric. The woman wore a long, dark coat. Her shoes made no sound. She held out a badge. Real leather, not the shiny kind the orderlies wore. "I'm Detective Karen Doyle." "Ms. Whitaker." "I think we should talk." I didn't move. She crouched a little to meet my eyes. "There's been a complaint filed, medical fraud, possible financial coercion. We've reviewed preliminary documentation." Her voice was lower than the others, not softer, steadier. I need you to tell me what you remember. I didn't speak right away, not because I couldn't, but because I'd learned people expect the broken to be loud. She waited. Outside the window, the vending machine flickered. One of the orderlies walked past, humming to himself, unaware that something had shifted. I looked at my hands. They were steady now. I looked at the cuff of my sleeve. A loose thread curled like a question mark. I looked at the woman in the coat. And then finally, I nodded. The next day, I was given new clothes. No one explained anything, but one of the nurses stopped calling me sweetheart. Jessie handed me a slip of paper. I unfolded it. It had an address and a time. At the bottom, Margaret Ellison's name was underlined in pen. There was no message. Just that. Melanie returned once more before I left. She didn't bring the scarf this time. She looked tired, like she hadn't expected the calls she was now getting. She leaned against the frame of the room. This isn't how we wanted it. Then she opened the bag. Inside, there were printed forms. I recognized the logo from a brokerage firm. We can still make things smooth if you sign a retroactive consent. That way, the family doesn't get dragged into anything messy. She adjusted her hair. You know this is all a misunderstanding. I folded my hands in my lap. She slid the papers closer. Her voice dropped half a pitch. Brandon's trying to protect what's left of the estate. This isn't personal. Her nails were painted in a pale mauve. There was a chip on her index finger. I stared at her hand, then at the pen she'd brought. Then I looked back at the spot where the old call button used to be. It had been replaced with a newer, sleeker one, the kind you can't press by mistake. I didn't reach for it. I didn't touch the pen. I didn't speak. She waited. Then she sighed and left the papers on the table. There's a kind of silence that isn't blank. It has weight. It hums. When I was 10, I once hid in a cabinet after breaking my mother's porcelain swan. I waited 2 hours in the dark, holding the broken head in my hand, trying to will it back together. I never got caught. The next morning, my mother set the table like nothing had happened. That was the first time I understood silence could be a shield. That's what I wrapped around myself now, not to hide, to endure, to outlast, to walk out whole. I hadn't heard my own name spoken without a clipboard in someone's hand for nearly 3 weeks. The apartment smelled faintly of pine and mothballs. The front lock had 3 turns, and I turned all of them each time I stepped in or out. Karen had handed me the keys with no ceremony, just a quiet nod and an envelope with the rent paid through 6 months. I unpacked slowly, each blouse folded, each cardigan pressed flat with my palm. There were only 9 hangers, so I rotated the ones I thought I might wear most. A lavender scarf with a worn patch at the hem went on the hook by the door. No one called me Mom the whole first day, or the next. I kept noticing that. In the bottom of my tote, I found a cracked makeup mirror. Not from the hospital, this one had been mine. The reflection showed a faint coffee stain at the collar of my blouse. I hadn't tasted coffee since the clinic. They served it cold there, and only in paper cups that stuck to the lips. A knock at the door wasn't sharp. It was practiced. Karen leaned in without waiting. We confirmed the listing's been removed. The realtor's license is now under review. I nodded. She placed a manila folder on the counter and pointed to a paragraph. The report was ghostwritten. He never saw you in person. I picked up the folder but didn't open it. She sat. The money trail matches the timing. Brandon got a transfer 3 days after the evaluation was filed. A consulting fee. $600,000. I looked down at the cuticle of my left thumb. It had a small crescent of dried blood where I'd picked at it too long. Margaret called 2 hours later. Her voice was more precise than warm. You'll have full control back, but we need to proceed in stages. Quiet ones. She faxed over a draft with a yellow tab on the signature line. I didn't sign it that day. At night, I opened the linen drawer. Inside the sheets smelled unfamiliar like hotel starch. I folded the top edge over once then again. On the floor, I placed the slippers I brought from my old bedroom terry cloth, right heel frayed. I hadn't worn them since being sedated. There were no family photos on the wall, no holiday cards tucked into refrigerator corners. The space was clean, but uninhabited. I found myself looking for dust just to see something imperfect. Karen returned the next morning, notepad in hand. "We've got the full financials. He leveraged your property against 3 investment instruments, all signed under the guardianship clause." I didn't look at the documents. She opened her laptop and pulled up a browser. "There's something you might want to see." A web page loaded light gray background, sleek fonts. Real estate. The listing was still cached. My bedroom was the 3rd image in the gallery. Cream walls, a bookshelf I'd bought after my husband passed. The quilt was still tucked on the far side, just like I left it. "Zoom in," I said. "The headboard." Karen hesitated. "You're sure the left corner?" She clicked. The photo enlarged. There it was, the shallow scratch near the edge. A tiny split in the grain. My husband made it on our 3rd anniversary trying to hang a photo crooked. He refused to patch it. Said it gave the room a story. I didn't say anything more. Later, over tea, real tea this time, not the clinic powder, Margaret placed her phone on the table. "We have Beckett's voice. Full recording. He admits the report was pre-filled. Names changed later." I stared at the mug. There was a small crack near the rim. I rotated it away from my mouth. Margaret continued, voice level. "It's enough for a criminal investigation. But you'd need to testify." Karen chimed in. "We don't have to make this loud, but we can make it permanent." I let the silence stretch. Later that afternoon, I ironed a pair of soft gray pants I hadn't worn in years. They still fit. The waistband was looser now. I received one message from Brandon. Just one. "Let's be reasonable. We can work something out. Don't let outside people poison this." There was no greeting, no name. The next day, Melanie's voice showed up on voicemail. "Whatever Karen's telling you, she's twisting it. You're not well, Diane. We were trying to help. Please remember that." She didn't say sorry. She didn't say my name again, either. I pulled the curtains halfway closed and brewed another cup of peppermint tea. Karen delivered a stack of papers in the evening. They were marked Level 1, Recovery Protocol. The top page was labeled in red, Stages of Asset Restoration, Phase Silent Reinstatement. I held it by the edge. I didn't ask what came after Level 1. In the back of the folder was a letter, not addressed, just titled Witness Affidavit. Jessie's handwriting. The nurse from the clinic. She remembered everything Karen said, and she was willing to sign. I touched the corner of the page. A soft smear of ink near the bottom right. Probably from her thumb. No one had offered to call me Diane in that place. No one had said I could go home. But Jessie had left a note in the book cart. "You don't belong here." That had been enough. I turned off my phone that night. In the morning, I sat by the window and watched the light move from one side of the floor to the other. I counted the seconds between each car that passed. When Karen knocked again, I didn't answer. On the kitchen table, I placed a single slip of paper. Not a document. Not a memo. Just a line I wrote by hand. I remember everything now, and I left it there next to the cup, the water still warm. They always rang the doorbell like it was urgent, even when nothing ever was. I opened the door halfway. Brandon was holding Emma's shoulder gently, like she needed to be anchored to the earth. Grace stood a step behind, arms crossed her blouse too formal for a visit like this. We thought we'd check in. It's been a while. I looked down at the floor between us. The corner of the welcome mat was curled, water-stained from yesterday's rain. Inside, I made tea. No one asked. They sat on the small couch Margaret helped me choose. I used mismatched cups. One had a chipped rim. The other had faint lipstick I never quite managed to scrub off. Brandon spoke first. There's been a lot of confusion. Honestly, Mom, we're just trying to find a way forward. That's all. I placed the teacup in front of him without a saucer. He didn't touch it. Emma leaned in, voice low. We were going to come sooner, but Dad said you needed space. I nodded. The kind people give animals when they're afraid they'll bite. She's not here, Brandon added. Melanie, she's still processing. She never wanted this to turn into a legal battle. I noticed the folder on the table before he slid it toward me. Manila. Folded once worn at the spine. I brought this to show our willingness, a compromise. You keep the unit on Eastwood, we'll cover expenses. And we retain control of the proceeds. There's still quite a bit left. The way his voice softened on "we retain" struck a strange rhythm in my ears. Grace, always more precise, placed a pen beside the folder. This way we all stay out of court. No one has to relive anything. Brandon reached for his tea. His hand shook slightly. He set it down untouched. The air conditioner clicked on. I didn't remember setting it. The hum filled the silence until Emma broke it. Grandma, were you really sick? She asked it without malice. More like asking if a fire alarm had really gone off last week or if it was a false test. I looked at her and reached for my own tea. The rim was smooth. No chips. That depends, I said, on who profits from me being declared otherwise. Brandon let out a breath. Not loud, just short. We all just want peace. There was a time I would have believed him when he still wore secondhand suits and tried to fix leaky faucets himself. That man used to eat cereal standing over the sink and talk to me about stock options he didn't understand. That man gave up piano lessons to afford Emma's braces. That man is no longer in the room. I opened the folder. Terms typed in Calibri bolded sections in blue. At the bottom of page 2, the name Melanie Whitaker was signed in ink, the date 2 days before I was released. The ink had smudged slightly on the tea. She never pressed hard enough. Emma fidgeted. Grace glanced at the door like it might end the conversation. The truth is, Brandon murmured, this whole situation. It's destabilized things. For all of us. The trust, the inheritance, the taxes, Emma's schooling, Dad's memory. You know we're trying. I stood slowly and walked to the kitchen. The ceramic dish rack held only 3 plates. I washed the 4th just to hear the sound of water over his voice. When I returned, the folder was still open. The pen remained uncapped. Brandon stood. Just consider it okay. Emma approached, hesitated, then lightly hugged me. We miss you. I looked over her shoulder at the wall calendar. It was still on last month. No one had flipped the page. Grace tapped her keys against her thigh. It's not too late to fix things. I walked them to the door but didn't open it. Brandon reached past me to turn the knob. I hope we can close this chapter soon, for everyone's sake. After they left, I sat on the floor. The manila folder lay like a patient waiting for a diagnosis. I tore the corner first, just enough to start a rip. Then I rolled it tighter until it fit in the ash dish I used for mint wrappers. A match lit quickly. The paper curled in on itself, black lines pulling into silence. The only legible part before it turned to cinder. For her care. Estimated remaining value after sale, $1.04, $230. I didn't look away. The scratch on the floor from the moving dolly hadn't been fixed. Every time I passed it, it reminded me things leave marks. I took the chipped cup from earlier, rinsed it twice, and placed it upside down to dry. There are things I'm learning not to explain anymore. Sometimes I think people only water plants so they won't forget what life looks like when it's still becoming. The basil pot by the window was no bigger than a loaf of bread. But each morning I touched its soil, checked the curve of its stems, and turned the pot a 1/4 inch so the leaves wouldn't lean too far in one direction. I had grown used to asymmetry, but not neglect. I bought the seeds myself after standing too long in the garden aisle of a local store. A woman offered to help, called me ma'am, like I might forget what I was looking for. I thanked her and left with just the seeds and a small bag of soil. I didn't need much. I had carried less than that across rooms where no one listened. A package from the pharmacy arrived by mistake. Heartburn pills. Not mine. I walked them to the correct door. A young man opened it phone to ear. He didn't pause. He mouthed thanks and shut the door with his heel. It reminded me of the time Brandon handed me a birthday card and said, "Just sign for both of us, okay?" I didn't visit Margaret that day to ask what I could recover. I went to ask what they still had to lose. She had arranged the documents neatly. No commentary, no highlighters. A printed log of wire transfers. A notarized testimony from a former medical assistant. Video stills from the clinic, the date stamp clear on the frame. In one, Melanie leaned across a desk with a pen already uncapped. A legal pad sat between her and Dr. Beckett. The top page had been torn off. Margaret's pen tapped the last document. "We're almost there," she said, then slid it toward me. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I pulled out a small folded paper. 6 words written in black ink. "I am not disposable." Not anymore. She read it. No nod, no comment. Just the quiet sound of a file being closed. That night, I found an envelope with a return address already printed, my old address. The one still listed on the real estate website. The photo hadn't changed. My headboard was still there. So was the reflection of a lamp I once broke during an argument and glued back together with fishing epoxy. I placed the paper inside, sealed it, and left it near the basil to mail in the morning. I began waking at 5. Not out of routine, but because the apartment was quietest then. No children in the courtyard, no traffic hum. I would press my palms against the wall and feel for the warmth of the rising sun. My fingers remembered the rhythm of breath even when I forgot to count it. Jessie showed up on a Sunday. I had only given her my temporary address once during a moment neither of us acknowledged aloud. She held a paper cup and stood in the doorway without stepping in. "I thought maybe you'd want an update. They're investigating him, Beckett. The licensing board's involved now." I kept the emails. I wrote down everything I remembered. I let her sit. I didn't say much. There's a nurse still working there who said Melanie brought a different woman in last month. Same routine. Early dementia claim. Except this one had been her aunt. Jessie traced the rim of her cup. "I told them you weren't the only one." I noticed her shirt had a coffee stain shaped like a comma. I wondered how long it had been there. Maybe she didn't even see it. "Ms. Whitaker, I think you were the first person who didn't flinch when I said it looked fake." She looked up. "I remember the way you blinked, like it didn't surprise you, only disappointed you." I didn't correct her. I watched the basil instead. It had begun to lean toward the corner where the light was weakest. I turned the pot. After she left, I boiled water and poured it into my blue ceramic mug. The rim had a tiny chip. I always turned that part away from my lips as if the crack was contagious. I reached for the drawer and took out a small, fabric-wrapped box. The cloth was old ivory, once part of a handkerchief set. The knot had come undone long ago, but I never retied it. Inside was my wedding ring. The last time I wore it was the morning after his funeral. I had taken it off with deliberate care, wrapped it twice, and placed it in the drawer without ceremony. No one had asked why. Brandon had cleared the flowers. Melanie had canceled the memorial lunch, and someone left a voicemail reminding me to call the insurance office before the end of the month. The ring still fit, a little tighter. The skin beneath it had softened. I slid it on and watched how the metal caught the light, not out of sentiment but out of memory. I wore it now, not for who I had been with, but for who I had been before all this. There was a mirror across the room. I didn't go to it. I stood still for a long time, then sat with the cup in both hands. The basil needed water again. I'd wait until morning. I didn't reply to Brandon's message. It had come through earlier, "Mom, we need to talk. You're making this worse than it has to be." He had sent it at 4:12 a.m. The silence between messages is often louder than the messages themselves. I pressed my thumb against the ceramic right at the chip, held it there, then moved it away. Some cracks stay. That doesn't mean they win. I never liked the sound of my own name typed in bold. It looks too final, too loud for someone who spent a lifetime walking lightly. The woman at the notary desk handed me the pen without ceremony. I wore gloves that morning, though it wasn't cold. I removed the right one, smoothed the paper, and signed. 3 signatures. 1 on the will, 1 on the trust, 1 on the letter stating clearly, "None of my estate shall be distributed directly or indirectly to Brandon Whitaker or Melanie Hart. Whitaker, under any circumstance." The lawyer nodded once. She asked if I wanted a copy. I declined. I already knew the shape of my decision. Outside, I slipped the handwritten note into the envelope addressed to Brandon's counsel. No decoration, no greeting, only 1 line. "This is my final legal statement. Any further contact will be treated as harassment." The drop box clicked shut like a gavel. I went home. I folded the gloves back into a drawer that held an old bus schedule and a dried basil leaf I had pressed into a notebook. 2 mornings later, the phone rang at 9:12. Not my cell, the landline Karen had installed in case. Her voice didn't rise or fall. "We executed the arrest this morning. Both of them are in custody." I didn't move. A tea bag sat untouched in a cold mug. The words stayed in the room longer than she did. She told me Melanie was picked up at a spa downtown. Midway through signing a facial receipt, she had used a card tied to the escrow account from the condo, the same one I used to clean for. Brandon was taken in at his office. He was explaining a property listing to a new client. The deposit file, $600,000, was in his outbox, half open, time-stamped, a week before I was released. There were no sirens, no cuffs in alleys, just printed charges, low voices and ink drying on paper that wouldn't smudge. The report read, "Felony elder exploitation, coerced consent, and contract fraud, falsification of medical documents for financial gain, illegal property transfer without legal ownership." I didn't cry. I didn't pour tea. I sat on the edge of my new bed, a cheaper frame than the old one, but solid. The mattress didn't sag. That was enough. The court summoned me the next week. No fanfare, no private gallery. Just overhead lights and the clack of shoes across linoleum. I walked alone. Margaret met me at the door, but didn't hold it. I didn't ask her to. On the stand, I told them what happened. Slowly, clearly. I didn't embellish or soften. I described the documents I never saw, the pills I never understood, the signatures I don't remember writing, the papers they slipped beneath my hand while I was still unsure where the door was. They played the video. Melanie's voice low-clipped. "Just sign it, Mom. It's best. Trust me." My hand trembling. A pen guided into it, my name forming itself. The room stayed silent when the footage ended. No coughs, no whispers. One juror leaned back just slightly. Another rubbed his thumb along the edge of the bench. 4 hours later, the verdict arrived. Brandon Whitaker, 10 years federal. First 6 without parole. Melanie Whitaker, 12 years primary architect of the scheme, both barred from holding legal guardianship over any elder until 2045. Margaret closed her folder. No one clapped. No one stood. It felt more like a room finishing a long breath. Outside, Brandon's lawyer approached me. Neutral tie briefcase, practiced tone. He says he still loves you, that he hopes someday you'll forgive him. I turned my face toward the parking lot. Then I answered, "Love doesn't drug you, lock you away, and sell your life while you sleep. That's not love. That's ambition in a borrowed suit." I didn't wait for his reply. The following afternoon, I returned to the building, not to reclaim, just to see. The door code had changed. Karen had secured a one-time pass. Inside, it smelled like varnish and fresh paint. My walls were pale now, unadorned. The echo returned when I walked. No wedding portrait in the hallway. No ceramic cat on the kitchen shelf. The light above the dining table still flickered once, then held steady like it always did after the second storm of spring. In the master bedroom, I opened the closet. One shelf remained. There folded was the blue sheet from the old linen set, the one we bought our 3rd year in. A bleach spot in one corner, faint but still shaped like Michigan. Next to it, a silver ring in a Ziploc pouch. The engraving inside had faded. J&D, all the days I picked it up. Not to wear, just to feel the weight again. I walked out with only those 2 things. I didn't check the mailbox. I didn't turn off the lights. On the way down, I passed a new realtor's flyer on the front desk. Sun-drenched luxury unit. Over $2 million in recent upgrades. Available immediately. No mention of who paid for the sunlight. At the curb, a boy on a scooter bumped the planter I used to tend. He didn't notice. The basil I had planted last year had been ripped out for decorative gravel. I stood for a moment, then walked away, the ring in my pocket, the sheet under my arm. No one pushed me. No one called after me. No shadow followed. And I didn't look back. Not because I was strong, because finally I didn't need to. I used to think stillness was the same as waiting. The kettle clicked behind me. I didn't rush to pour. I let it cool slightly, the way I'd read somewhere that good mint releases slower in warm water. I picked a few leaves from the tin cup by the window, some curling, some soft, and let them fall into the strainer. I no longer wrote shopping lists for other people's tastes. The photograph on the wall was crooked by half an inch. I left it that way. Emma's braid had come loose in the picture, and Grace's shoelaces were untied. Both were laughing, real laughter, mouths open, eyes closed. Not the practiced kind families stage for greeting cards. A noise at the door. Paper sliding across the floor, legal envelope. I recognized the crest. Corner marked Notice of Appeal. I didn't touch it. Just slid it under a stack of things on the console. On top of that pile was a smaller envelope addressed in blue pen. Folded note, inside edges soft from being reread. Grandma, you saved my life. I'll never let anyone erase you again. I'd placed it over the lawyer's envelope on purpose, like sealing something shut without needing tape. The kitchen table had only one chair now. I ate facing the window. I didn't speak out loud anymore when I cooked, didn't ask who wanted coffee or if anyone wanted seconds. The only voice that filled the air was one I chose to keep. Don't cling to things because everything is impermanent. That line stayed with me. Page 104. I turned to it often, not to recite it, just to see if it still held weight. It did. Maury's words reminded me that even memory has breath. If you hold it too tight, it suffocates. The tin teaspoon I used had a small dent, probably from the dishwasher in the old house. Brandon used to say I should just get a new set. The guests notice Mom. I stirred my cup anyway. Jessie had mailed me a clipping, a scanned copy of the official censure against Dr. Beckett. Unethical conduct, revoked license pending charges. I folded it into the back of a notebook. Didn't read it twice. When the buzzer rang, I ignored it. Twice. On the third ring, I pressed the intercom. "It's me," the voice said, just dropping off the scholarship folder. I didn't respond. A soft knock followed. I waited until the hallway was silent again before opening the door. A small white folder leaned against it. Inside, brochure acceptance letter and a sticky note. "She's starting next fall. Top of her class. Thought you'd want to know. No signature." The handwriting was Karen's. I brewed another cup of tea, poured it into the mug with the faded logo, Sierra Pines Library Volunteers. No one remembered I used to do that every Tuesday. No one had asked why I stopped. The basil plant tilted toward the light. I rotated the can an inch to even it out. A small thing, but mine to tend. The mirror on the balcony shelf was round, handheld, and chipped along one edge. I held it steady. My hair had silvered more in the past month. A faint scar marked the right temple, just under the hairline. It no longer looked out of place. I didn't wear makeup that day. The powder had cracked in its tray weeks ago. I hadn't replaced it. A neighbor waved from a balcony across the courtyard. I lifted my hand in return. No words, just a gesture to say I'm here. Still. Later I sat at the table again, a thin-lined notebook open in front of me. I picked up a pen, capped, and uncapped it twice, then wrote one line near the middle of the page. My name is still Diane Whitaker. I remember who I am now. No signature. No date. Just the sentence. Outside, the day shifted toward something quieter. The kind of stillness that wasn't about waiting, but about being. A shift from holding on to letting be. I folded the page once and placed it beneath the book. Not to hide, just to keep. The envelope from Melanie's lawyer remained unopened. I knew it would stay that way. I adjusted the seat cushion under me, smoothed the corners of the tablecloth. The print was faded, small yellow wildflowers barely visible now. It had been in a storage box for years. I remembered picking it with David, thinking it looked cheerful. Back then, I hadn't known how rare that kind of quiet joy could be. I reached for the teapot. The steam had slowed the liquid warm, but no longer hot. I poured anyway. It tasted clean. Nothing added, nothing stolen. For the first time in years, I wasn't listening for someone to knock. Wasn't hoping for a message or fearing one. The room was full, not of people, but of things I chose. I touched the small silver ring on my hand. It used to belong to my mother. She wore it when she sorted mail or stirred soup. I used to think it was too plain. Now it felt exact. The kettle let out a soft click again, out of heat. I didn't move. I was where I belonged.